Some people are born into comfort, others are born into power. And then there are people like Jae-min Park, born into everything. Jae-min was the only son of Chairman Park, one of South Korea's most powerful billionaires, a man whose name opened doors, silenced rooms, and moved markets without effort. From the outside, Jaemin's life looked flawless. Elite education, private jets, homes in cities most people only dreamed of visiting. But beneath all of it, there was a strange truth no one could fix. Jaemin felt empty. Not sad, not broken, just untouched. Love never interested him. Romance felt like a language everyone else spoke fluently while he only nodded along. Relationships came and went, always ending the same way, polite, distant, forgettable. His best friend Sung-ho once laughed and said, "You're not heartless, you're just switched off." Jaemin didn't argue. He preferred solitude. Long flights, quiet hotel rooms, sketchbooks filled with buildings, streets, and landscapes. But never people. People were complicated. They wanted things from him. And his father wanted one thing more than anything: a successor with a life. "You can't inherit an empire and live like a shadow," Chairman Park told him one evening, his voice calm but firm. "You need roots, a family, something real." Jaemin gave the answer he always gave: "I'm fine." But his father didn't believe that anymore. So when a major business trip to Ghana appeared on his schedule, Chairman Park insisted his son come along. "Just this once," he said. "Travel with me. See something different." Jaemin hesitated. Ghana wasn't on his list. It felt distant from the polished world he knew. But his father made a deal. "Come with me," Chairman Park said, "and when we arrive, I'll stop pressuring you." That promise mattered. So Jae-min agreed. Accra greeted him with heat, color, and noise. The city felt alive in a way he wasn't prepared for. Streets overflowed with movement, vendors calling out, music playing, engines humming, people laughing without restraint. Jae-min hated it. At first, he stayed indoors, sketched, read, watched the city from behind glass walls, detached as always. Ghana felt slower than Seoul, less controlled. It made him uncomfortable. One afternoon, restlessness pushed him outside. "Take me somewhere interesting," he told the hotel driver, Kwame. "Anywhere." Kwame smiled knowingly. "All right." They drove through parts of the city Jae-min would never have seen otherwise. Markets, workshops, streets buzzing with life. Then suddenly, the car jerked. Steam rose from the hood. Kwame pulled over. "We're overheating." Jae-min sighed, already irritated. Another delay. Another inconvenience. As Kwame checked the engine, a passerby stopped, glanced inside, and shook his head. "You need Amma," the man said. "Amma?" Jae-min repeated. "She's a mechanic, best around here." Minutes later, a woman approached them from down the street. She wore work boots. Her hands were dark with grease. Her expression was calm, focused, unimpressed by luxury cars or wealthy passengers. Amma opened the hood, examined the engine, and spoke without drama. "Loose pipe," she said. "That's why it overheated." Her movements were quick, confident. She tightened the pipe, wiped her hands, and finally looked up. That was when Jae-min felt it. Not excitement, not desire. Something quieter. Like a door opening in a room he didn't know existed. Amma met his eyes without hesitation. No curiosity, no fear. Just calm confidence. "It'll run now," she said. Jae-min nodded, unable to explain why his chest felt strangely heavy. Amma suggested taking the car to her workshop to be safe. Jae-min agreed. The workshop was small, modest, but people clearly trusted her. Customers greeted her with respect. She led her team without shouting, without force. Jae-min stood to the side, watching. He wasn't used to admiring people, especially not strangers. But there was something grounding about her presence. She didn't perform. She didn't soften herself. She simply existed. Strong. Capable. Unapologetic. That night back at the hotel, Jamin opened his sketchbook. Without planning to, he drew her. Not glamorous, not idealized, just real. It was the first time he had drawn a person in years, and that unsettled him. The next visit was for payment. The one after that was to check the car. Then another because he found himself driving past the workshop without thinking. Amma noticed. "You don't need reasons," she said one afternoon, wiping her hands on a cloth. "You can just stop by." Jamin didn't know what to say, because for the first time in his life, he wanted to. If this story is pulling you in, take a second to subscribe. Some stories change lives, and this is one of them. What Jamin didn't know was this. The mechanic fixing engines in a small Ghanaian workshop was about to shake a billionaire empire and force the world to question everything it thought it knew about love, class, and destiny. Jamin Park didn't understand what was happening to him. He told himself he was only curious, that Ghana was new, that Amma was simply different from the people he usually met. But curiosity didn't explain why he adjusted his schedule to pass by her workshop, or why he remembered the sound of her voice long after he returned to the hotel. Amma noticed the pattern before he did. He arrived without announcements, sometimes with small gifts, sketch pencils, bottled water for the workers, tools he claimed were extra. He stayed longer than necessary, watching her work, listening more than he spoke. "You don't talk much," she said one afternoon, tightening a bolt beneath a lifted car. "I'm better. I'm at listening," Jamin replied. She smiled at that. Not impressed, just amused. Amma wasn't easily impressed. Life hadn't allowed it. She had learned early that admiration didn't fix problems. Skill did. Discipline did. Surviving did. When she was 10, both her parents died within months of each other. No warnings, no explanations that made sense to a child. One moment she had a home. The next, she didn't. School stopped. Dreams stopped. Responsibility didn't. She learned by watching, fixing broken things because broken things couldn't be ignored. Engines made sense to her in a way people often didn't. Machines were honest. If something failed, there was always a reason. Jamin listened as she spoke, sitting quietly on a worn wooden bench in the corner of her workshop. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity her. He simply listened. That mattered more than he realized. "You could have done anything," he said softly. Amma shrugged. "I did what I had to do." For some reason, that answer stayed with him. At night, Jamin found himself sketching again. Not buildings, not skylines. Amma, standing beneath sunlight, leaning against an engine, focused, unbothered by the world around her. He didn't show her the drawings at first. They felt too personal, too revealing, until one day she caught a glimpse. "Is that me?" she asked. Jamin froze. "Yes," he said. She studied the page quietly. "No one's ever drawn me before," she said, not emotional, just surprised. "I didn't know I was worth the trouble." Something tightened in Jamin's chest. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but instead he said, "You are." While Jamin was changing, others noticed too. His father watched his son grow lighter, more present, more alive. "You're different here," Chairman Park said one evening at dinner. "Ghana suits you." Jamin didn't respond. But for the first time, he didn't deny it either. Then his father asked a simple question. "Who is she?" Jamin looked up sharply. "The driver mentioned her," Chairman Park continued. "The mechanic." Silence hung between them. "She's important," Jamin finally said. Chairman Park didn't react the way Jamin expected. No anger, no dismissal. Instead, his father nodded slowly. Then I'd like to meet her. When Jae-min invited Amma to dinner, she laughed at first. With your father? She asked. I fix engines. You do more than that, he replied. She hesitated, not because she wasn't curious, but because she knew the world men like him came from. Worlds that didn't make room for people like her. I don't belong there, she said. Jae-min met her gaze. You belong anywhere you stand. She didn't answer right away, but she agreed. The dinner was quiet, elegant, carefully balanced. Amma wore a simple dress. Nothing extravagant. Nothing borrowed from a world that wasn't hers. Chairman Park watched her closely, not judging, but observing. When she spoke plainly. About learning through experience, about running her workshop, about leading people without titles or degrees. Chairman Park listened, and something shifted. She's not what I expected, he admitted later. Jae-min replied, That's the point. Then everything changed. Photos appeared online. A billionaire's son, a Ghanaian mechanic. The headlines were cruel, speculative, dismissive. She's a distraction. She doesn't belong. This could damage the family legacy. Amma saw them first. Jae-min saw her withdraw. I don't want to be a problem, she said quietly. Your life is bigger than me. Jae-min shook his head. You are the first real thing in it. If this moment resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe. Some stories remind us what truly matters, but pressure was building, and soon a decision would be made, one that would shock everyone. Amma thought she understood pressure. She had carried responsibility since childhood. She had survived loss, hunger, and uncertainty. But nothing had prepared her for what it felt like to become a headline. The photos spread fast. Blurry images taken outside a hotel. A billionaire's son stepping out of a car. A woman beside him. Unfamiliar, unpolished, undeniably ordinary in the eyes of the world. And that was enough. Comment sections filled with judgment. People who had never met her decided who she was, reduced her to labels that ignored her story, her effort, her worth. She's after money. She'll ruin his future. This is a mistake. Amma read every word. Jae-min tried to stop her. Don't look, he said. But she had lived her life facing reality head-on. She wasn't about to hide now. What hurt most wasn't the insults. It was the doubt. Not in herself, but in what her presence might cost him. Jae-min had never cared about public opinion before. Wealth insulated him from criticism. But this was different. This wasn't about him alone. His father called him into a private meeting. The board is concerned, Chairman Park said carefully. Investors are watching. Optics matter. Jae-min remained silent. I'm not telling you to end this, his father continued, but you must understand the consequences. I do, Jae-min replied, and I accept them. It was the first time he had spoken to his father, not as a son, but as a man making his own choice. Chairman Park studied him closely, and then he did something no one expected. He made a call. Amma was back at her workshop when she received the invitation, not from Min, from his father. She stared at the message for a long time. Why would he want to see me? She asked. Because he sees you, Jae-min said simply. The meeting was formal, private, honest. Chairman Park didn't offer apologies or reassurances. He offered respect. You didn't ask for this attention, he said, but you're handling it with dignity. Amma met his gaze. I don't want to hold your son back. Chairman Park shook his head. You aren't holding him back, he said. You woke him up. That was when he made the offer, an invitation to Korea, a place in the company's global innovation program, not as a favor, as an opportunity. Amma felt the weight of it immediately. She had never left Ghana, never worked in corporate spaces, never studied formally. I'm not qualified, she said. Chairman Park replied calmly, "You are capable." The decision wasn't easy. Accepting meant leaving everything she knew. Declining meant staying safe, but watching Jae-min walk a path without her. She spent nights thinking, days pretending nothing had changed, until she realized something. She had spent her life fixing broken things. This was a chance to build something new. She accepted. Korea was overwhelming. The language, the pace, the unspoken rules. Whispers followed her through hallways. Curious glances, quiet skepticism. She's the mechanic. How did she get here? She won't last. Amma heard them, and she worked anyway. She arrived early, stayed late, asked questions, learned systems that were never designed for people like her. Jaemin supported her quietly. No grand gestures, just presence, coffee on her desk, messages of encouragement, silence when she needed it. 3 months in, something shifted. Engineers began asking for her input. Her hands-on knowledge filled gaps theory couldn't. She saw problems differently, effectively, honestly. And when the annual innovation contest was announced, Amma submitted a design no one expected. A hydrogen-powered truck blueprint. Efficient, scalable, practical. The room went silent when she presented. Then the applause came. She won. Against hundreds. If you believe talent should speak louder than titles, subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be told. The headlines changed. So did the narrative. Success didn't change Amma. That was what surprised people most. The awards, the recognition, the sudden respect. None of it softened her edges or inflated her pride. She still arrived early. Still listened more than she spoke. Still solved problems with her hands and her mind instead of her ego. But it changed how the world treated her. Engineers who once avoided her now waited for her opinion. Executives who had whispered now nodded with approval. Her name appeared in reports, presentations, and meetings she never imagined she would sit in. And Jaemin watched all of it quietly. He didn't feel possessive. He felt proud. For the first time, he wasn't standing in front of someone's success. He was standing beside it. Chairman Park noticed too. "You chose well," he told his son one evening. Jaemin replied softly, "I didn't choose. I listened." Life began to settle into a rhythm. Workdays were long. Evenings were simple. Sometimes they walked through quiet streets. Sometimes they shared meals in silence. There was no need to perform for each other. Love, for them, wasn't loud. It was steady. One night, standing on a rooftop overlooking the city, Jae-min realized something that startled him. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of responsibility. Not of inheritance. Not of the future. Amma had given him something wealth never could. Anchoring. The proposal wasn't impulsive. Jaemin planned it carefully, thoughtfully. On the same rooftop where they once shared dinner as strangers to this world, he arranged lanterns, soft lights, jasmine petals scattered by hand. Amma arrived thinking it was just another evening. She didn't expect the quiet intensity in his eyes. "I used to think I was missing something," Jaemin said, "but I wasn't missing it. I just hadn't met it yet." He knelt. The ring was simple, custom-made, a small wrench design intertwined with a heart. Amma laughed first, then she cried. "Yes," she said, "before you finish." News spread fast. But this time, the reaction was different. People who once doubted now admired. Stories reframed, narratives rewritten. The wedding became a celebration no one expected, but everyone remembered. Ghanaian colors, Korean tradition, high life rhythms blending with soft melodies, Kent cloth alongside hanbok, food from both worlds shared at the same table. Amma stood tall, not as someone who had been chosen, but as someone who had earned her place. Jaemin looked at her and understood what love truly was. Not rescue, not sacrifice, but recognition. If this story reminded you that love can change everything, subscribe for more stories like this. The wedding did not end the story. If anything, it exposed it to a much larger world. In the weeks that followed, interviews were requested, articles were written, opinions were offered by people who still didn't fully understand what they had witnessed. Some praised the union as modern and inspiring. Others quietly questioned whether it would last. Amma noticed something strange during that time. The criticism no longer hurt the way it once had, not because it disappeared, but because it no longer defined her. She had crossed an invisible line, the one between proving yourself and knowing yourself. Back in Ghana, people gathered around her old workshop. Some came out of pride, others out of disbelief. A few young girls stood at the gate just to watch, whispering her name like it was something sacred. Amma didn't give speeches. She rolled up her sleeves and fixed engines. Because to her, that was the point. Success wasn't about distance from where you came from. It was about carrying it with you without shame. Jamin watched her from a step behind. He had spent his entire life ahead of people, financially, socially, structurally. For the first time, he understood what it meant to walk beside someone instead, and that realization changed how he saw everything. The company felt different too, not because Amma had married into it, but because she had influenced it. Departments that once dismissed practical knowledge began integrating it. Training programs shifted. Mentorship models expanded beyond degrees and titles. Chairman Park approved initiatives he might once have ignored. When asked why, he gave a simple answer: talent doesn't always come dressed the way you expect. Those words traveled, quietly at first, then loudly. At night, Jamin sometimes returned to his sketchbook. He still drew buildings, streets, places, but now people appeared too. Amma reading in silence, Amma working with focused intensity, Amma laughing when she thought no one was watching. He no longer feared attachment. He welcomed it. Because love, he realized, wasn't a loss of control. It was clarity. One evening, months after the wedding, Amma stood alone on the balcony of their home in Seoul. The city lights stretched endlessly below her. Beautiful, intimidating, full of movement. Jamin joined her quietly. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" she asked. He considered the question carefully. "No," he said. "For the first time, I feel like I'm living mine." She smiled. That answer meant more than he knew. Their story continued to ripple outward. A scholarship program was launched, focused not on grades alone, but on demonstrated skill and resilience. Workshops were funded in places that had been overlooked for decades. Opportunities created for people who had never imagined being seen. Amma insisted on one condition. "No faces on billboards," she said. "Let the work speak." And it did. There were still moments of doubt, late nights, misunderstandings, cultural differences that didn't disappear simply because love existed, but they faced them the same way they faced everything else, directly, honestly, together. They didn't try to impress the world anymore. They had already surprised it. Sometimes people asked Jamin what had shocked him most about everything that happened. He never mentioned the headlines, or the backlash, or the global attention. He always said the same thing. That the thing I was searching for my whole life wasn't hidden, he said. It was just somewhere I never thought to look. And sometimes when Amma was asked how it felt to change her life so completely, she answered without hesitation. "I didn't chase anything," she said. "I fixed what was in front of me." That answer stayed with people, because deep down, they knew it was true. If, like, this story has stayed with you so far, this is one of those moments worth pausing for. Because stories like this aren't really about billionaires or mechanics. They're about recognition, about seeing value where the world once looked away. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, take a moment to subscribe. there are more waiting to be told. But even now, even after everything, one truth remained. The world remembered this story as a headline. Jamin remembered it as a broken car on a hot afternoon, and Amma remembered it as just another day at work. The day everything quietly began. Time passed in a way that felt different for both of them. Not rushed, not suspended, just steady. For Jamin, time used to feel like something chasing him. Deadlines, expectations, a future already written by other people. Now it felt like something he could walk alongside. Days unfolded with purpose instead of pressure. For Amma, time had always been survival. Every hour mattered. Every decision carried weight. But now, for the first time, she wasn't running from anything. She was building towards something. That difference mattered more than either of them fully realized at first. The attention around their marriage faded slowly, as attention always does. The world moved on to new stories, new scandals, new distractions. But in smaller, quieter spaces, their impact remained. Young engineers began referencing Amma's work in meetings. Workshops in Ghana received new tools, new training, new hope. A few mechanics, self-taught, overlooked, underestimated, found doors opening where walls once stood. Amma never took credit. She didn't need to. Her influence spoke in outcomes, not applause. Jamin found himself stepping into roles he had once avoided, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He attended meetings with intention, asked questions he had once ignored, challenged systems that no longer made sense to him. For the first time, the empire he was meant to inherit felt like something he could reshape, not just protect. Chairman Park noticed. "You're not afraid of change anymore," he said one afternoon. Jamin replied, "I'm afraid of staying the same." His father smiled at that. There were moments, though, when the difference between their worlds resurfaced. Formal events where Amma felt out of place. Conversations filled with references she had never learned. Expectations that came without explanation. Some people were polite but distant. Others warm but curious. A few still skeptical, waiting for failure to prove them right. Amma felt it, but she didn't retreat. She had survived worse than discomfort. What mattered was that Jamin never tried to shield her from it. He stood with her in it. One night, after a long corporate dinner, Amma removed her heels and sat quietly by the door. "I don't think I'll ever fully belong here," she said. Jamin sat beside her. "Belonging isn't about fitting in," he said. "It's about not shrinking." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and understood something important. He wasn't trying to save her. He was learning from her. Their home became a place of quiet balance. Korean traditions mixed with Ghanaian habits, silence respected, laughter welcomed, arguments resolved without raised voices, differences acknowledged, not erased. Love didn't make them the same. It made them honest. One afternoon, Amma received a message from a young girl in Ghana. She wrote about watching Amma work at the workshop years ago, about believing that strength could look like grease-stained hands and steady focus, about choosing to study mechanical engineering because of her. Amma read the message twice, then once more. She didn't cry. She smiled. Because impact, she realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet belief, planted in someone else. Jamin found her later, sitting with her thoughts. "Do you ever think about how unlikely all of this is?" he asked. She nodded. "All the time." "Does it scare you?" "No," she said. "It reminds me to stay present." Their story was no longer about shock. It was about continuity, about what happens after the headlines fade, about choosing each other again and again in ordinary moments. If you've stayed with this story this far, you already know something important. The most powerful changes don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, and they stay. If you appreciate stories that move slowly but stay with you, this is a good moment to subscribe. Somewhere in Accra, Amma's old workshop still stood, not as a symbol of where she came from, but as proof that beginnings matter. And somewhere in Seoul, a man once known only as a billionaire's son was becoming something else entirely. Partner, a leader, a person awake to the world. The story wasn't ending, it was widening. Every story reaches a point where love alone is not enough. Not because love disappears, but because the world demands proof. For Jaemin and Amma, that moment arrived without warning. It began as a rumor, a shift in market confidence, a few concerned calls, subtle changes in tone during meetings. Nothing dramatic at first, just enough to make people uneasy. Then the pressure surfaced openly. An overseas expansion failed, not catastrophically, but publicly. Analysts speculated. Investors questioned leadership decisions that had moved away from tradition. Quietly, some began pointing fingers. And once again, Amma's name surfaced in whispers. Not because she had caused the problem, but because she represented change. Jaemin saw it immediately. She doesn't fit the image. This isn't how the company used to operate. We took unnecessary risks. Amma heard it too. She said nothing, but silence doesn't mean immunity. Chairman Park called Jaemin into his office. Perception is fragile, he said carefully, and legacy is built on trust. Jaemin understood what his father wasn't saying. The easiest solution was distance, less visibility, fewer joint appearances, clear separation between Amma and the decisions being questioned. It would calm the noise, it would protect the empire, and it would quietly fracture the truth. That night, Jaemin didn't sleep. He replayed years of avoidance, years of standing back while others made decisions for him. He thought of the man he used to be, the one who felt nothing because feeling required responsibility. And he thought of Amma, always standing where she was needed, always absorbing pressure without complaint. When he finally spoke to her, he didn't soften the truth. "They want you out of sight," he said. "Not gone, just reduced." Amma listened, then she nodded. "I expected that." The calmness in her response unsettled him. "You don't have to accept this," he said quickly. She looked at him then, steady and clear. "This isn't about acceptance," she said. "It's about choice." Amma understood something Jaemin was still learning. Systems resist disruption, not because disruption is wrong, but because it exposes weaknesses. She had never been afraid of stepping back if it meant the work could continue. But this time was different. This time, stepping back meant agreeing with a lie. The next board meeting was tense. Charts, projections, controlled voices, hiding urgency. Then Jaemin spoke. He didn't defend Amma emotionally. He defended reality. The failure wasn't caused by innovation, he said. It was caused by fear of committing to it fully. Silence followed. He continued. If we only embrace change when it's convenient, then we don't believe in it at all. Eyes shifted. Lines were crossed. But something else happened too. Respect. Later, alone together, Amma finally spoke the words she had held back. "I don't want to be the reason you lose this," she said. Jaemin answered without hesitation. "You're the reason I finally understand it." This moment didn't resolve the tension. It sharpened it. Some leaders supported Jaemin. Others remained cautious. The future felt uncertain in a way neither of them had experienced before. But there was clarity now. They would not shrink. If this story has taught you anything so far, it's this. Real love doesn't hide when pressure arrives. It steps forward. If you believe courage matters more than comfort, this is a good time to subscribe. In the days that followed, the company didn't collapse. It adapted. Slowly, reluctantly. but undeniably. And in quiet corners, people noticed something. The empire hadn't weakened. It had grown more honest. Amma returned to her work without announcement. Jaemin stood beside her without apology. And together they prepared for the next chapter, one that would test not just their love, but the future they were shaping. Because the world had seen their beginning. Now it was about to see their resolve. The tension didn't explode the way people expected. There was no public scandal, no dramatic collapse, no sudden victory either. Instead, change came quietly. Over months, not days. Departments adjusted, pilot programs were refined, mistakes were studied instead of hidden. Decisions slowed down, but they grew more intentional. The company began listening to data, to experience, to people who had never been heard before. Amma remained present, but never positioned. She didn't attend meetings to prove anything. She spoke only when there was substance behind her words. That restraint earned trust in ways force never could. Jaemin learned from that. He stopped trying to lead through explanation. He led through consistency. Outside the company, the narrative continued to shift. Journalists returned to the story, not to question it this time, but to understand it. Articles focused less on contrast and more on impact. Not billionaire's son and mechanic, but unconventional leadership, practical innovation, bridging experience with strategy. The tone softened. So did the world's resistance. In Ghana, the effects became tangible. Workshops expanded. Training programs launched. Partnerships formed with technical schools. Young people who once believed opportunity lived somewhere else began finding it at home. Amma visited when she could. She didn't arrive with cameras. She arrived with questions. What do you need? What's missing? What's working? Those questions mattered more than speeches. One afternoon, standing outside her old workshop, Amma watched a group of young mechanics debate over an engine problem. Confident, curious, unafraid to be wrong. She felt something then. Not pride, responsibility. Jaemin joined her later. They don't see you the way the world once did, he said quietly. They never did, she replied. They saw possibility. As time passed, Chairman Park began stepping back, not suddenly, deliberately. He watched his son take on greater responsibility, not out of obligation, but conviction. One evening, he said something Jaemin never expected to hear. "You're not preserving my legacy," his father said. "You're redefining it." Those words carried weight. The empire continued, but it no longer looked the same. It felt less rigid, less distant, more human. Some people resisted, most adapted, a few flourished. Amma and Jaemin rarely spoke about the past now. They didn't need to. The story had moved beyond shock. It had become example. There were still challenges. There always would be. But they faced them with something they hadn't had before: alignment. They knew who they were. They knew what they stood for. And they knew what they wouldn't compromise. If you've stayed with this story this long, this is where many people realize something important. The most shocking part wasn't that a billionaire's son fell for a mechanic. It was that the world changed because they refused to pretend. If stories like this matter to you, subscribing helps keep them alive. One evening, as they walked through the city together, Amma asked a simple question. "Do you think people will remember us?" Jaemin considered it. "Not for who we were," he said, "but for what we made possible." She smiled. That was enough. Their story didn't end in celebration. It continued in quiet progress, in lives shifted slightly off course, in doors opened just enough to let light in. And somewhere between Accra and Seoul, between engines and boardrooms, between silence and courage, something lasting had taken root. Not a fairy tale, a foundation, Years later, people would struggle to explain exactly when the story stopped being news and started being history. There was no single moment, no final headline. Just a gradual settling, like dust after movement, until what once felt controversial became accepted, even expected. Amma grew into her role without ever naming it. She wasn't introduced as a symbol or a statement. She was introduced as someone who understood how things worked, both machines and people. Her presence in meetings became ordinary, and that ordinariness was the victory. Jamin noticed something else too. The younger generation listened differently. They didn't ask where Amma came from. They asked how she thought. The company's internal culture shifted in ways spreadsheets couldn't track. Mentorship became more than hierarchy. Career paths bent instead of running straight. Practical skill was no longer treated as an afterthought to theory. It didn't make everything perfect, but it made things honest. At home, life softened. They learned the quiet language of long partnership, when to speak, when to let silence hold the moment, when to disagree without fear. They argued sometimes, about time, about priorities, about how much responsibility was too much. But they never argued about direction. They were always facing the same way. One evening, while organizing old boxes, Jamin found his earliest sketchbooks. The pages were filled with buildings, tall, precise, distant. No faces, no movement. Amma flipped through them slowly. "You were hiding," she said gently. "I didn't know how not to," he replied. She handed the book back. "You learned." In Ghana, Amma's name was spoken quietly but firmly, not as someone who left and forgot, but as someone who returned and remembered. Workshops that once struggled now trained others. Small businesses became anchors. Pride replaced apology. None of it felt dramatic. That was the point. Jamin began writing more, not publicly, privately. Notes about leadership, about responsibility, about what happens when power listens instead of speaks. He never planned to publish them, but he knew one day someone else might need them. There came a moment, simple, unannounced, when Chairman Park formally stepped down. No ceremony, no grand farewell, just a handover built on trust. Jamin didn't celebrate. He reflected, because he understood now what leadership truly was, not control, stewardship. Amma stood beside him that day, not on stage, but close enough. She didn't need recognition. She had impact. If you've followed this story from the beginning, this is where many people pause and realize something. The most important transformations don't feel like revolutions. They feel like alignment. If this story has meant something to you, subscribing is a small way to support stories that value depth over noise. Sometimes journalists asked Amma if she ever regretted stepping into a world that wasn't designed for her. She always answered the same way. "I didn't step into it," she said. "I worked in it." That distinction mattered. On a quiet afternoon, sitting together without agenda, Amma asked Jamin a question she had never asked before. "Do you think you would have found this life without Ghana?" He didn't answer right away. "No," he said finally. "I think I would have survived, but I wouldn't have lived." She nodded. That answer told her everything. The story had long stopped being about shock. It had become about continuity, about what remains after attention moves on, about the small decisions that quietly change trajectories. And somewhere, years from now, someone would tell this story not as gossip, but as example. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a broken car and a choice not to look away. There comes a point in every long story where movement gives way to meaning. Not because life slows down, but because perspective widens. For Jamin and Amma, that point arrived quietly, folded into ordinary days, the kind of days that never make headlines, but shape everything that follows. They woke early, worked steadily, returned home tired but grounded. The extraordinary had become routine, and somehow, that felt like the greatest success of all. They had built a life that didn't require witnesses. Jamin often thought about the man he used to be, the one who moved through cities without leaving footprints, the one who observed life instead of participating in it, the one who mistook distance for control. He didn't feel shame about that version of himself. He felt gratitude, because without that emptiness, he might never have recognized fullness. Amma noticed his reflections even when he didn't speak them. She had always been attuned to quiet, changes. Survival had trained her that way. She knew when a room shifted, when a person needed space, when a moment needed stillness instead of words. That awareness carried into everything she did, including love. One evening, while preparing a simple meal together, Amma asked something unexpected. "Do you think the world needed our story?" Jamin paused, knife still in hand. "I think the world needs reminders," he said. "Ours just happened to be loud at first." She smiled at that. They didn't chase legacy, but legacy found them anyway. Not in monuments or memorials, but in systems that bent just enough to let more people through, in conversations that sounded different than they once had, in decisions made with broader vision. Those changes didn't carry their names. That mattered. In Accra, the old workshop still opened its doors each morning. New faces, new tools, same purpose. Amma visited less often now, but when she did, she worked. Like she never left. Hands steady, focus sharp, presence familiar. People didn't ask for advice anymore. They asked for stories. She told them none. She taught them how to fix what was in front of them. Jamin's leadership settled into something unremarkable by design. No dramatic speeches, no forced charisma. He listened. He adjusted. He stayed. And that consistency built trust stronger than vision statements ever could. If you've stayed with this story until now, you've likely felt something shift. Because the ending isn't about arrival, it's about continuity. If you value stories that honor the quiet work behind change, subscribing helps keep them alive. On an evening not marked by anniversaries or achievements, they sat together watching the city lights below. Amma leaned her head against his shoulder. "This life," she said softly, "it's not what I imagined." He smiled. "Me neither." She waited. "But it's honest," he added. She nodded. Honesty had always been her measure. There was no final lesson spoken aloud, no grand summary, just an understanding that love, when rooted in respect, doesn't need drama to survive, and change, when guided by courage, doesn't need permission to begin. Years from that moment, someone would tell this story differently. They would shorten it, simplify it, turn it into a headline again. But the truth would remain between the lines, that a billionaire's son fell for a mechanic. And what happened next didn't shock everyone because it was unbelievable. It shocked them because it was real. Memory has a way of softening sharp edges. What once felt impossible slowly becomes inevitable in hindsight. People look back and say it makes sense now, forgetting how uncomfortable it felt while it was happening. That was true for Jamin and Amma. Their story, once debated and dissected, became something people referenced casually, a point in time, a shift that didn't need explanation anymore. And that was how they knew it had truly settled. Amma noticed it first during a visit to a technical institute in Ghana. She was invited to observe, not speak. No cameras, no introductions beyond her name. Students worked confidently, discussing designs that blended theory with real-world understanding. One young woman adjusted an engine component and said, without hesitation, "If it doesn't work in practice, it doesn't matter on paper." Amma smiled to herself. The words sounded familiar, not because she had said them publicly, but because they had lived inside her for years. Influence didn't always echo loudly. Sometimes it simply continued. Jamin experienced a similar moment thousands of miles away. A junior executive challenged a long-standing policy during a meeting, calmly, respectfully, with evidence drawn from people on the ground. The room listened. No one dismissed the voice. Jamin realized then that leadership had multiplied. It was no longer centered on him, and that was exactly what he wanted. At home, life moved gently. They learned to recognize the passing of seasons without marking them, achievements without announcements, losses without dramatization. When days were heavy, they shared silence. When days were light, they shared laughter. They didn't fill space for the sake of comfort. They respected it. One night, Amma found Jamin revisiting his old notes, the ones he had written years earlier about leadership and responsibility. "You still think about publishing these?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I don't know who they're for." She considered the pages. "Maybe they're not meant to be read," she said. "Maybe they're meant to be lived." He closed the notebook. That answer settled the question. The world continued changing, as it always does. New technologies, new conversations, new challenges that demanded attention. But something subtle remained. People asked different questions now. Not just how fast something could grow, but who it would include. Not just who was qualified, but who was capable. Those questions reshaped rooms, quietly. If you're still listening, this is the moment where many stories would try to impress you with a final twist. This one doesn't need it. Because the most meaningful resolution isn't surprise, it's recognition. If stories like this resonate with you, subscribing supports the telling of more stories that value substance over spectacle. On an ordinary afternoon, Amma and Jamin walked past a small repair shop in Seoul. The door was open, tools scattered, music playing softly. Amma paused. She watched for a moment, then smiled. "What are you thinking?" Jamin asked. "That if I hadn't stopped that car in Ghana," she said, "this would have just been another shop." "And if I hadn't let it break down," he replied, "this would have just been another street." They laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. Their story didn't conclude with certainty. It concluded with trust. Trust that what mattered would continue. Trust that what they built didn't depend on attention. Trust that love, when grounded in respect, didn't need protection from the world. Somewhere, someone was still telling the old version of the story, the headline version. But somewhere else, someone was living the lesson instead. And that was enough. Every story, eventually, returns to where it began, not in location, but in meaning. Long after the world stopped watching, long after opinions faded into memory, there remained a single truth that never changed. Everything started with a breakdown, a car overheating on a hot afternoon, a man who felt nothing, a woman fixing what was in front of her. Nothing about that moment looked important. That was the lesson. Jamin sometimes thought about that version of himself. The one standing beside the road in Ghana, impatient, disconnected, convinced his life was already complete. He didn't judge that man. He understood him. Because that man had no idea that life wasn't waiting to be found in comfort or certainty or control, but in attention. Attention to the moment, attention to people, attention to what quietly calls you forward. Amma rarely looked back, not because the past didn't matter, but because it had already done its work. She carried it with her in smaller ways, in how she listened, in how she fixed things, in how she never mistook recognition for worth. She had learned early that dignity wasn't something you were given. It was something you maintained. Together, they became proof of something the world often forgets. That love doesn't need rescue to be powerful. That success doesn't require forgetting where you began. That difference isn't a weakness. It's an advantage waiting to be respected. Years from now, someone might hear their story for the first time. They might expect drama, They might expect spectacle. They might expect a fairy tale. Instead, they would find something quieter, a story about presence, about choosing not to look away, about understanding that the most meaningful connections are rarely announced. The world didn't change overnight because of them. It changed gradually, in conversations that sounded different, in decisions that included more voices, in young people who longer assumed opportunity belonged elsewhere. Those changes didn't carry their names. That made them stronger. On an ordinary day, with nothing to celebrate, Amma and Jae-min walked together without destination. No agenda, no audience, just movement. At a crosswalk, a car stalled. Steam rose. A small crowd gathered. Amma instinctively stepped forward. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask who owned the car. She opened the hood. Jae-min watched her, smiling. Some habits never leave you. Later that evening, as they sat in comfortable silence, Jae-min spoke softly. Do you think we'd recognize each other if everything were different? Amma considered the question carefully. Yes, she said. Because I'd still be fixing something, and you'd still be watching. He laughed quietly. She smiled. Recognition didn't require circumstances. This story isn't about a billionaire's son, and it isn't about a mechanic. It's about what happens when people stop playing the roles assigned to them and start responding honestly to what's in front of them. If you've listened all the way to the end, then you already understand something many never do. The most shocking part of this story wasn't who fell for whom. It was that love didn't ask permission. It didn't arrive loudly. It simply stayed. If stories like this matter to you, subscribing ensures more of them find their way to people who need them. And so, the story closes the same way it began, with a problem that needed attention, with hands willing to work, with a choice not to turn away, not a miracle, not a legend, just a moment. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Time didn't rush to prove the story right. It never does. Instead, it moved forward the same way it always had. Quietly, steadily, without ceremony. Days turned into weeks. Weeks folded into years. And what once felt fragile became something dependable. People who only knew the story from the outside still spoke about it, as if it were unlikely. A billionaire's son. A mechanic. Different worlds. But the truth was simpler. Two people paid attention. One noticed a problem instead of walking past it. The other treated every problem as something worthy of care. That was the common ground. Long after the headlines lost interest, life continued in ordinary ways. Morning routines, work that required focus, evenings that didn't demand explanation. There were no grand speeches at home, no reminders of what they represented to others, just conversations about what needed fixing next. Sometimes Jae-min thought about the pace he once lived at, the speed, the noise, the constant forward motion that never asked him how he felt. He understood now that distance doesn't come from travel. It comes from not being present. And presence, he learned, was a discipline. Amma never thought of herself as someone who changed another person's life. She fixed things because they needed fixing. She showed up because that was how you survived. But over time, she began to understand that consistency leaves an impression. Not the kind that demands attention, the kind that teaches others how to stay. They didn't celebrate milestones the way people expected. No dramatic anniversaries. No public displays meant to reassure anyone. What mattered was quieter, the way trust deepened without needing confirmation, the way silence became comfortable, the way they learned each other's rhythms. Somewhere in Ghana, a workshop still opens its doors every morning. The sound of metal rolling upward, sunlight touching the ground, young hands learning old skills, old hands making room for new ideas. People don't talk about where it all led. They talk about what works. Somewhere in Korea, boardrooms feel different now. Not because of policies written in bold letters, but because listening happens earlier. because experience counts as much as credentials, because someone once proved that ability doesn't need permission. If you were to ask them what changed the most, neither would mention love first. They would talk about perspective, about how easy it is to miss what's important when you assume life will announce itself, about how the moments that matter most rarely arrive dressed as opportunities. This story didn't end with certainty. It ended with awareness, with the understanding that meaning isn't found by chasing significance, but by responding honestly to what's already in front of you. If you're listening to this now, at the very end, then maybe that's the point. Maybe this story found you when it needed to. Not to impress you, but to remind you that slowing down is a choice. That attention is an act of respect. That stopping can sometimes move your life forward. Because the moment that changes everything doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't ask for belief. It only asks one quiet thing. Will you notice? And sometimes, that's enough.